Imagine this. It's December 12th, 1939. The clock has just struck 9:04 a.m. A brittle silence hangs over a frozen Finnish forest where the temperature has plummeted to a bone-cracking minus 40 degrees Celsius. Now picture 15 Soviet soldiers trudging through this Arctic stillness, their heavy wool coats frozen stiff, their every breath crystallizing into icy plumes that cling to their scarves. These men belong to the largest and most feared fighting force on Earth, the Red Army of Joseph Stalin. They have not come for diplomacy. They've come to crush. Their mission? To obliterate a small nation of stubborn farmers. Moscow predicted this would take 10 days, a mere formality. And so these soldiers march forward, loud, confident, metal gear clanking against their bodies, utterly convinced of their invincibility. But the forest was watching. They saw no movement. They heard no sound. They assumed, fatally, that they were alone. Then it happened. A sound so soft it could have been the snapping of a twig. A quiet crack, devoured almost instantly by the snow. The soldier at the rear of the patrol dropped silently. No scream, no explosion, just gone. One heartbeat he was there, the next erased from existence. The lieutenant at the front halted, confused. He turned his head slowly, scanning the white stillness behind him. Nothing. 3 seconds later, another crack. This time his radio man, 200 meters ahead, collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. The lieutenant barely registered a faint hissing sound before the man fell. A bullet? He wasn't sure, but now he was afraid. Panic surged. The patrol dove into the snow, desperate to vanish into the landscape. But the snow, deep and soft, offered no shelter. It was not cover. It was a trap, a frozen killing field. And then the shots came, relentless, precise. Crack. A soldier trying to ready his machine gun slumped face first into the drifts. Crack. A sergeant pointing for cover arched backward, arms splayed. Crack, crack, crack. In the span of under 3 minutes, 12 men lay dead. 3 remained, paralyzed not just by fear, but by something deeper. The terror of an enemy they could not see, hear, or even imagine. They didn't retreat. They couldn't. For 4 agonizing hours they remained motionless, half buried in snow, praying to whatever gods they had that they would not be next. When the survivors finally dragged themselves back to their lines, their report was dismissed. It made no sense. There had been no flash of a rifle muzzle, no chatter of a sniper team, no tracks, no sign of a shooter, just death from nowhere. It was as if a phantom had stalked them through the forest. A ghost, they whispered, a Belaya Smert, the White Death. But this was no specter. It was a man, a 33-year-old Finnish farmer, short, unremarkable, barely 5'3". A man whose quiet demeanor concealed the soul of a warrior, and who, on that frozen day, had declared a one-man war against an empire. And his weapon? Not some futuristic invention, but a simple trick, a subtle, ingenious tactic so effective, so overlooked, that it would forever alter the art of sniping. This is the tale of Simo Häyhä and the small, forgotten adaptations that turned him into the most lethal sniper in the chronicles of human warfare. But to truly understand how a solitary man could bring the world's largest army to its knees, you must first grasp the nature of the war he fought. It was a war that, by every measure, should never have happened. A true David versus Goliath saga. Let's go back to November 1939. Joseph Stalin, ever calculating, looked westward to his modest neighbor, Finland, and made his move. He wanted land. He wanted islands. He wanted military bases. Not for conquest, but for preparation. He saw Finland as a necessary buffer, a speed bump in case Nazi Germany decided to turn east. But Finland, under the leadership of Marshal Carl Gustav Emil Mannerheim, said no. Stalin, enraged and impatient, decided to take what he wanted by force. On November 30th, 1939, following a staged provocation, the shelling of Manila, the Soviet Union invaded. The balance of power, laughably uneven. The Red Army stormed across the border with 1 million troops. The Finns had a mere 300,000 tons, many of them volunteers and militia. Stalin sent 6,000 tanks. Finland could muster only 32. The Soviet Air Force launched with 3,000 aircraft. The Finnish Air Force had 114. The world looked on and pitied the Finns. Time magazine declared them doomed. And why wouldn't they be? Soviet military doctrine at the time, known as deep battle, was built upon the idea of sheer, overwhelming numbers. Crush the enemy with force, not finesse. Red Army political officers told their men to expect a swift campaign. Within 2 weeks, they'd be parading triumphantly through Helsinki. Many brought their dress uniforms in their packs, already imagining the victory celebration. But the forests of Finland held other plans. But the Soviets had made the same fatal mistake every invader throughout history has made. They saw the numbers on the map, not the map itself. They were marching into Finland in winter. Not just any winter, but the kind that turned forests into frozen labyrinths and rivers into glass. 70% of the country was trees, endless, whispering, white. And the Finns? They had something no army manual could measure, something they called sisu, a word that doesn't translate easily. It means grit, yes, but also defiance, a fierce, unyielding courage that lives deep in the bones. The Finns knew they couldn't win a conventional war. They couldn't outgun the Red Army, couldn't stop 1,000,000 men head-on. So they decided not to fight that kind of war at all. Instead of meeting tank with tank, they let the tanks come, luring them onto the frozen lakes. And then, with cold precision, they shattered the ice beneath them with artillery fire, swallowing Soviet armor whole. They let those enormous Soviet divisions crawl single file down narrow forest roads, the only arteries through the wilderness. And once the invaders were deep enough, once their long columns were stretched thin, the Finns cut them to pieces. Out of the trees came white ghosts, Finnish ski troops, silent, unseen, gliding through snowdrifts like wraiths. They struck fast, burned field kitchens, assassinated officers, and vanished again. This was Mahdi warfare. The word meant bundle, and that was exactly what they did. They chopped those endless Soviet columns into small, manageable bundles of men and machines, trapped, starving, freezing bundles. And then they simply waited, because their greatest weapon wasn't artillery or rifles or even courage. It was the cold. Minus 40 degrees Celsius. Engines froze solid. Tank grease hardened into stone. Soviet soldiers wearing thin, mud-colored coats stood out against the snow like ink stains on white parchment. Thousands froze to death, sometimes still standing, rifles frozen to their hands. This was the nightmare the Red Army had stumbled into, and right in the heart of it, on the Kola River front, was a quiet farmer with a rifle. Simo Häyhä. He was no professional soldier. He came from a small border town called Rautjärvi. A farmer, a hunter, a man who had spent his life among the birch and pine. In his local civil guard, he was known as a gifted marksman, the kind of man who could hit a fox's ear at 200 meters just for practice. When the war broke out, Simo was 33 years old. He was assigned to the 34th Infantry Regiment, and as he watched the Soviet invasion roll into his homeland, that ancient sisu awakened within him. But he also had something else, a gift. He didn't just know how to shoot, he understood the physics of shooting in the cold. He knew how steel contracted, how air density shifted, how frost could warp a rifle's aim. He knew more about it than the engineers who wrote the manuals. His issued weapon was the Finnish M28-30, a simple, dependable rifle, a variant of the old Russian Mosin Nagant. It had iron sights, no scope, but it was steady, precise, and deadly reliable. His commanding officer, meaning well, offered him an upgrade. A new rifle fitted with a Soviet PE-4 scope, the cutting-edge technology of its time. Every sniper in every modern army wanted one. Magnification, clarity, the future of warfare. But Simo refused. It was his first illegal modification, his first rebellion against military logic. His officers thought he was mad, but Simo's reasoning was as sharp as his aim. He knew 3 things the sniping schools of the world hadn't yet learned. First, scopes reflect light. Even the smallest glint of sun off a glass lens, half a kilometer away, could betray a sniper's position. In a landscape made entirely of white, that single flash might as well have been a flare screaming, "I'm over here!" Iron sights, by contrast, were matte black steel. They gave no reflection, no giveaway, no death. Second, scope's fog. At -40, the warmth of a human eye pressed against the glass instantly turned to mist. One breath, one blink, and your sight vanished behind a wall of white. You'd have to wipe it clear. But by then, your target was gone. Or worse, your target had found you. Third, scopes force your head higher. To use one properly, a sniper must lift his face several inches above the snow. And in a world of flat, frozen terrain, those inches could mean the difference between predator and prey. So Simo stuck with his iron sights. He didn't need magnification. His hunting grounds had already trained his eyes for distances between 150 and 400 meters. His perfect killing range. He needed only consistency, and the weapon never failed him. But that was merely his first secret. His other innovations were simpler and far more ingenious. The Red Army, humiliated and bleeding, began adapting. Their own snipers hunted for Finnish marksmen. They searched for two telltale signs: muzzle flash and breath. When a rifle fires, it kicks up snow in front of the barrel. A tiny puff, a burst of white powder. To a trained counter-sniper, it was as clear as a neon sign. Simo's solution was meticulous. He didn't just find a firing spot, he built one. He would spend an hour carefully packing the snow in front of his barrel, pouring water over it, letting it freeze into a solid plate of ice. When he fired, that ice absorbed the blast. The snow stayed still. No puff, no signal, just silence and death. Then there was breath. At 40 below, a man's breath hung in the air like smoke. To a sniper lying in ambush, that cloud was a death sentence, a visible trail leading straight to him. Simo's fix, so absurdly simple it bordered on brilliance. He filled his mouth with snow. For hours he would lie there with a packed ball of ice beneath his tongue. It cooled his breath inside his body. When he exhaled, his air matched the outside temperature, invisible. That was Simo Häyhä's art. Small, quiet adjustments born of patience, instinct, and an intimacy with the cold that few men could ever understand. There was no fog, no breath, no glint, no poof of snow, no signal of life. Now pause and imagine this. You're a Soviet sniper, scanning the ridge lines through your gleaming scope, desperately trying to find the phantom that's been thinning your ranks day after day. You look for what you've been trained to see, a shimmer, a slight rise in the snow, a puff of warm breath in the frozen air. But there's nothing, because Simo Häyhä isn't giving you anything. No lens flare. He has no scope. His head is lower than yours. His rifle doesn't stir the snow. His breath blends into the cold like mist into fog. For all practical purposes, he is a ghost. He had taken the plain, unassuming logic of a farmer, the logic of someone who listens to the wind, feels the weight of snowfall in his bones, knows the rhythm of winter, and turned it into a doctrine of invisibility, a doctrine of death. And now, armed with that doctrine, he went to work. His days began before the sun even touched the treetops. He'd rise in silence, pack his rations, a slice of white bread, a lump of sugar, and dress in his meticulously layered white camouflage. He'd take his M28-30 rifle, his Suomi submachine gun, his skis, and say to his comrades the same quiet phrase, "I'm going hunting." Then he would vanish into the no man's land, and often beyond, behind enemy lines. He searched not for shelter but for vantage, a fallen tree, a gentle mound, a place with just the right arc and cover. He would craft his nest like an artist, packing snow with bare hands, placing ice in front of his barrel, tucking snow in his mouth. And then he would wait and wait and wait. The cold would sink into his bones like knives. Most men would shiver uncontrollably, and shivering ruined the shot. But Simo did not shiver. He had sisu. He didn't lie in the snow. He became the snow. He wasn't in the forest. He was the forest. Then a flicker of motion. A Soviet officer unfolds a map. 300 meters, crack. A machine gun team setting up in the open. 250 meters. Crack, crack. A soldier breaks into a run trying to reach cover. 350 meters. Crack. He never stayed in the same spot. One shot, maybe two, and then he was gone. He'd glide away on his skis 100 meters or more, find a new nest, and repeat the dance. By the time the Soviets responded, by the time their artillery thundered down on where they thought he was, Simo Häyhä was already in their flank, firing again. At sunset, he'd returned to his lines, silent as ever. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Arne Udalainen, would ask for the day's tally. 5, Simo would say. The next day, 8, then 12. At first, the officers didn't believe him. These weren't sniper numbers. No one gets 12 kills in a day. The manuals said a sniper might fire 1 shot, 2 at most. This was beyond doctrine. It was beyond belief. It was P-38 engineering all over again. The math didn't make sense because the man didn't fit the manual. So they sent an observer. That man came back pale, shaken. His hands trembled as he gave his report. Every single kill confirmed. The farmer wasn't exaggerating. If anything, he was underreporting. Then came the record-shattering days. December 21st, 1939. Simo Häyhä killed 25 Soviet soldiers. December 22nd, 23 more. Christmas Day, 1939. While Soviet officers toasted with vodka, Simo went hunting. His tally that day? 38 confirmed kills. In a single day. This wasn't war anymore. It was extermination. The front line at the Kola River had become a charnel house. The Soviets had thrown 12 divisions, over 160,000 men, into that sector. The Finns held with just 4 divisions. They were outnumbered 4-1. Soviet Commander General Kirill Meretskov sent wave after wave against the Finnish lines. They were torn apart by machine gun nests, shredded by ambushes, and relentlessly hunted by the ghost in white. Simo Häyhä wasn't just eliminating men. He was collapsing morale. There's a difference between being shelled by artillery, a cruel but faceless death, and being hunted by something you cannot see. Something that sees you. That kind of death breaks the mind. Soviet patrols began refusing their orders. Officers remained holed up in bunkers. Fires for warmth became invitations for death. Crack. The man closest to the flames would fall. Sometimes entire squads would huddle for safety. And then Simo would switch weapons, trade stealth for speed, and unleash hell with his submachine gun, annihilating them in a blur of gunfire. He wasn't just a sniper. He was psychological warfare. He had turned half a kilometer of front line into a death zone, a stretch of forest so haunted that men whispered before entering it. One man with an aging rifle and an iron will had frozen an entire sector of the Red Army in place. And this was the turning point. This was the moment the story twisted, like a blade buried too deep to ignore. Like Saburo Sakai's legendary dogfight in the skies, the problem had grown too massive, too deadly for the Soviet command to dismiss. This was no longer an anomaly. This was a crisis. The reports of a Belaya Smert, the White Death, raced through the Red Army like wildfire. They climbed from the terrified whispers of front-line soldiers, through the panicked dispatches of field officers, all the way up to Stavka, the Soviet high command itself. Stalin's generals were humiliated. The Red Army, the largest, most mechanized force on earth, boasting thousands of tanks, millions of men, and the grand doctrine of deep battle, was being humiliated by a few thousand Finns on skis. And worse, by one man. One man they could not find. One man they could not kill. The legend of the ghostly sniper spread like superstition among the ranks. A demon in white, they whispered. A cursed farmer who killed without mercy or sound. The Red Army could not tolerate such mockery. Stalin's empire could not bleed before the world, humbled by a single rifleman. The order came down from the highest level: find and kill the Finnish farmer. Forget strategic objectives. Forget territorial gains. The #1 priority in the Kola sector was now Simo Häyhä. The regular patrols were useless. The Red Army had learned that lesson the hard way. Sending them was no longer bravery. It was suicide. So they turned to their elite. First came the Soviet sniper teams. Hand-picked graduates of the prestigious Moscow Sniper School, armed with the newest SVT-40 semi-automatics and precision scopes. These were the best of the best, men who had spent their lives mastering the long shot. They came to hunt the ghost, but the ghost was waiting. Through their shimmering optics, they scanned for a flicker of movement, and in that very shimmer lay their death. Simo's iron sights caught the glint before they ever saw him. From 400 meters away, a single round would slice through their scope lens and into their eye. One shot, one kill. He hunted the hunters. He killed them, one by one. But even this failed to solve the problem. The Red Army's elite were dying faster than their replacements could arrive. The ghost wasn't disappearing. He was multiplying in fear and myth. So the Soviets escalated again. If a rifle couldn't reach him, maybe artillery could. A new order was issued. Whenever any Soviet soldier was killed by a single shot, the surrounding sector would be obliterated by mortar and artillery fire. Not a few shells, hundreds. Entire forests thundered under the bombardments, meant for one man. Simo survived them all. One day his position was struck by more than 100 shells. The earth convulsed, trees shattered, snow turned to black, smoking slush. His regiment, assuming no one could have lived through that inferno, marked him as dead. An hour later, he walked calmly back into the dugout. His white uniform ripped, his face smeared with dirt and blood. He had a few shrapnel wounds, nothing more. He nodded to his commanding officer and said quietly, "They were loud today." Then he reloaded, picked up his rifle, and went back out. By now, the Red Army was obsessed. Their greatest empire, their proudest doctrine, their machine of steel and numbers was being mocked by a 5'3" farmer from Rautjärvi. He had killed their finest snipers. He had survived their artillery storms. He was laughing in silence at their power. So they made one final attempt. In late February 1940, the Soviet command at Kola assembled something unprecedented, a special counter-sniper platoon, not a team, not a pair, an entire platoon. 30 of the Red Army's best marksmen, supported by machine gunners, equipped with the latest scoped SVT-40s, and given a single chilling mission, hunt the White Death. Do not come back until he is dead. A nation of millions now focused its might on one man. They were no longer fighting Finland. They were fighting him. And as they marched into the forest, the ancient irony of war revealed itself. The hunters had become the hunted. The platoon entered the forest just after dawn. 30 men armed to the teeth, moving with the cautious precision of trained killers. Their breath steamed in the brittle air. Their rifles glinted faintly in the weak morning light. They were confident. They had numbers, firepower, training, but Simo Häyhä had time and patience. He wasn't among the trees. He was beneath them, buried deep in a snowdrift 400 meters away, his M2830 resting on its ice block. His breath cooled to invisibility. He had been there for 6 hours, waiting, listening, becoming part of the landscape. He saw them long before they saw him, the 30 shadows creeping through the frost, their scopes glinting, their boots crunching like hammers on glass. They were loud, too loud. Simo waited until the first 10 men passed, then the machine gun team. His eyes settled on the man trailing behind, the radio man. Crack. The sound was swallowed by the snow. The radio man dropped, silent, before the platoon leader even realized what had happened. And in that instant, the hunter had struck again. The radio man collapsed, a clean hole through his chest. Instant death. The Soviet platoon didn't hesitate. They dropped to the ground, instincts taking over. The machine gun team spun and unleashed a furious 50-round burst into the forest ahead. A blizzard of lead hammering the trees. But they were shooting at nothing. They were shooting at a ghost. Because while they riddled empty branches with bullets, Simo Häyhä was already gone. He didn't run. He glided, silent as snowfall, vanishing into the trees on skis, veiled in his white camouflage. 300 meters to their flank, he slipped into a position he had prepared the day before. A hidden nest, a patient trap. And then he waited. The Soviet lieutenant, believing the sniper had fled, made a fatal decision. He gestured for his men to push forward. Slowly, cautiously, they crept ahead, scanning the snow-covered terrain. Crack. The lieutenant dropped. This time the shot came from the side. Panic detonated in the ranks. Their leader was gone. Their radio destroyed. They were deaf, blind, and leaderless. Now they knew. They were not hunting the White Death. The White Death was hunting them. As night descended, the temperature plunged to -35. Cold crept into their boots, their gloves, their bones. Fear grew thicker than the frost. They needed warmth. A fire. Training screamed, no fires. Survival instinct begged, light one. A group of 6 men broke ranks, clustered together, striking matches with trembling fingers. A tiny flame flickered, a last hope for life. But Simo wasn't far. He wasn't holding his rifle. He was holding his other weapon, the Suomi KP-31 submachine gun. From just 200 meters away, he stepped from the shadows, silent, white, inhuman, and opened fire. A full 71-round drum emptied in less than 10 seconds. The huddle was gone. The forest echoed with sudden violence, and then silence again. The remaining soldiers heard the blast from one direction. Still fearing the sniper fire from the other, they broke. Discipline shattered. They fled into the forest, into the dark, into the cold. Simo didn't pursue. He didn't need to. The wilderness and the winter would finish what he started. The next morning, Finnish patrols arrived. They counted 27 bodies. The elite counter-sniper platoon, hand-picked and armed with the finest weapons in Stalin's arsenal, had been erased. This was no longer war. This was a haunting. The most devastating weapon on the Kola front wasn't artillery or tanks. It was silence. And we know this, not from Finnish propaganda, but from the diaries of the men who faced him. One such diary belonged to a Soviet soldier named Pavel from the 75th Rifle Division. A letter to his mother, recovered long after his death, reads, "Mother, this is not war. This is hell. We do not fear the Finns. We fear the silence. In our doctrine, silence means peace. Here, silence means he is watching. When the artillery stops, our hearts stop with it. We know he is out there. We know he is looking at us. The silence is the White Death." Pavel outlined the unwritten rules of survival on the Kola front. Rule 1, never light a fire. The Finns have a saying, "Kola holds unless the men are ordered to light fires." We know this. We choose to freeze instead. Rule 2, never run to help a wounded man. When a man cries out, it is a trap. The ghost is watching the body. He is waiting for the medic. He is waiting for a friend. We leave our friends to die, or we die with them. Rule 3, never group up, but never walk alone. Both are death. Mother, I am not afraid of dying. I am afraid of waiting to die. This was the real power of Simo Häyhä. His bag of tricks, no scope glint, the ice-packed muzzle nest, the snow in his mouth. They weren't just battlefield tactics. They were psychological warfare. He had erased every trace of humanity from the hunt. He didn't appear. He didn't breathe. He became a force of nature. He was the cold. He was the silence. He was the White Death. Now the Soviet command was in full-blown crisis. The best snipers, gone. The elite platoon, annihilated. The artillery, ineffective. And their soldiers, on the edge of mutiny. The Kola front, once a crucial objective, was frozen in place, not by the Finnish army, but by the legend of one man. Desperation took hold. Stalin's generals had one last brutal option left. If you cannot kill the man with precision, then you kill everything with brute force. And so came the final order. Grid square removal. The Red Army no longer cared where Simo Häyhä was. They would flatten the forest. Everything, trees, ground, snow, men, would be erased. They were going to erase the entire forest. Not fight in it, not conquer it, just delete it. 1 square kilometer at a time, the Red Army began its most brutal strategy yet. Annihilation by saturation. They rolled in their heaviest guns, 152mm howitzers, heavy mortars, grid after grid, shell after shell. They weren't aiming at Finnish soldiers anymore. They were just firing, all day, all night. The pristine, white forests of Kola, once silent, still, and deadly, were pulverized into a black cratered moonscape. The Finns would later call it the Kola Holocaust. Tens of thousands of shells rained down every 24 hours. Trees were shredded into splinters. The snow turned to soot. The earth bled smoke. And still, Simo Häyhä hunted. The constant shelling made his job harder and easier. The thunder of explosions muffled the sound of his own rifle. The chaos masked his movement. He became a ghost among craters, stalking through a shattered world. And his kill count kept rising. 200, 300, 400. By early March 1940, in just under 100 days, his confirmed sniper tally reached an almost incomprehensible number. 505 men, 505 kills. That's an entire battalion, eliminated by one man, using a bolt-action rifle with iron sights. And that didn't even count the 200-plus men he killed with his Suomi KP-31 submachine gun. By every metric, Simo Häyhä was now the most effective soldier in the world. The Finnish high command took notice. They gave him a promotion, not just a small bump, but a historic leap, from corporal to second lieutenant, the fastest battlefield promotion in Finnish military history. They gave him a gift, a presentation-grade Sako M2830, engraved with his name, a symbol of national pride. Simo Häyhä, the farmer from Rautjärvi, had become a living legend. But the Red Army didn't see a legend. They saw an open wound, and they wanted him gone. March 6, 1940, the 100th day of the war, the Soviets launched their final, desperate offensive on the Kola front, a last attempt to break the line, to crush the resistance. Simo was in position, like always. But this wasn't a surgical hunt. This was a storm, a full-scale battle. He fired, reloaded, fired again. Already that morning, he had dropped several men. The Soviets knew roughly where he was, and they pummeled his sector with mortars. Amid the chaos, through smoke and snow, one Soviet sniper fired a single lucky shot. We will never know his name. We don't know if it was aimed or random, but the bullet he fired wasn't ordinary. It was an explosive round. Simo Häyhä, peering through iron sights, lining up his next target. Thump, not pain, just impact. Then, cold. His vision turned white, his mouth filled with hot liquid. Teeth, blood, bone. He tried to breathe, however, but couldn't. The bullet had entered his left cheek and detonated inside his mouth. It obliterated his jaw, shattered his face, tore off his cheek. He collapsed into the snow, unmoving, unconscious, bleeding out. His comrades saw him fall and rushed to his position. They expected to recover a body. What they found instead haunted them. Half his head was missing, one soldier said. There was no breathing, no pulse, no life. They carried what was left of him to the rear, to a pile of fallen Finnish soldiers, a makeshift morgue. The White Death was declared dead, and on the front the Soviets surged forward. The war was nearing its end. The Kola line was finally breaking, but far behind the line, a miracle. A soldier passed the pile of bodies. A leg twitched. He stopped. Looked closer. The man with no face was breathing. Simo Häyhä was still alive. A full week after the shot, his jaw was gone, his face destroyed. But his sisu, that unbreakable Finnish grit, was intact. He was rushed to a field hospital. He drifted between life and death. The war ended while he slept. March 13, 1940. The guns fell silent. Simo never heard the peace treaty signed, never heard the last mortar fall, never heard the Kola front finally go still. He had given everything and survived. On paper, Finland had lost the war. The Moscow peace treaty cost them 11% of their land. But the truth was harder to measure. The Red Army had been humiliated. Stalin's promised 2-week victory parade had become a 105-day disaster. They had thrown over 1 million men into Finland, lost over 3,500 tanks, 600 aircraft, and they had been bled, frozen, and terrified by a nation of farmers on skis, by one man with an old rifle. This is the ripple effect. This is the piano wire that changed the course of history. Because Joseph Stalin wasn't the only one watching. In Berlin, a different dictator was taking notes. Adolf Hitler had watched the Soviet performance in Finland. He saw a Red Army that was slow, poorly led, and psychologically shattered by one invisible sniper. The fear that Simo Häyhä had instilled, the quiet terror of a ghost in white, helped convince Hitler that the Soviet Union was a rotting house of cards. A year later, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in human history, and many historians argue that had it not been for the Winter War, had it not been for the exposure of every Soviet weakness, had it not been for Simo Häyhä, Hitler may never have dared to invade. The 505 men Simo Häyhä killed, they were just the beginning. The fear he inspired echoed far beyond the front lines. It shaped the course of history. But while generals debated and dictators recalculated their plans, Simo Häyhä was in a hospital, locked in a different kind of war. One fought inside his shattered body. His injuries were so catastrophic that even the doctors didn't know where to begin. Half his face had been destroyed. Breathing, eating, speaking, all impossible. He would endure 26 excruciating surgeries. They rebuilt his face from scratch. Bone was taken from his hip to reconstruct a jaw. Skin was grafted from his thigh to form a new cheek. Each surgery was a battle. Each recovery, a test of will. He spent 14 months in the hospital, years in recovery. And when he finally emerged, he was not the same man. The left side of his face bore the permanent scars of war. The White Death now carried war's mark on his own flesh. But he was not forgotten. Unlike Sergeant McKenna, whose mechanical genius was hidden in the shadows of secrecy, Simo Häyhä's legend was too immense to ignore. Marshal Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim, commander of the Finnish forces, personally promoted him. He was awarded the Cross of Kola, Finland's highest military honor. He tried to return to service in 1941 when Finland entered the continuation war against the Soviets. But his body could not follow where his courage still wanted to lead. His injuries were too severe. He was a hero, but a hero too broken to fight again. So what happens to the deadliest soldier in human history when the war is over? What becomes of the ghost when the snow melts? Simo Häyhä didn't chase glory. He didn't tour victory parades. He didn't write a memoir or sell his story. He did the only thing he'd ever wanted to do. He went home. His old farm was now in Soviet territory, so the Finnish government gave him a small piece of land in a new town. He returned to the quiet life, the life of a farmer. For the next 50 years, he lived the way he always had, breeding hunting dogs, tracking moose through the forests, and becoming one of Finland's most successful moose hunters. The war had taken his face, but not his skill, not his sisu, not his bond with the wild. He remained a quiet man, a humble man. He almost never spoke of the war. When curious reporters found him decades later and asked him, "How did you become the White Death?" he just shrugged. When they asked if he felt remorse for killing over 500 men, his reply was stripped of romance or regret. It was cold, honest. Farmer's logic: I did what I was told to do, and I did it as well as I could. In 1998, a journalist asked him one final question. What was the secret to your success? Simo Häyhä was 92 years old. His answer? Practice. Just one word. But behind it was a lifetime of patience, discipline, and brutal clarity. James McKenna had his 6-inch piano wire. Simo Häyhä had his iron sights. Both men saw something the doctrine did not. Where experts saw high-tech optics, Simo saw a glinting target. Where they saw theory, he saw snow. Where they saw rules, he saw survival. And in the frozen woods of Finland, that difference became destiny. Simo Häyhä died in 2002 at the age of 96. He was buried in Ruokolahti, in the quiet land he had helped to save. To this day, he remains the deadliest sniper in the history of warfare. A record untouched, a legend unmatched. This is how wars are truly fought, not always by massive armies or brilliant generals, but by the quiet sisu of individuals, by a mechanic in New Guinea who rewires a fighter plane, and by a farmer in Finland who turns winter itself into a weapon. If this story moved you, If it made you feel the chill of that silent battlefield or the pulse of courage in the face of hopeless odds, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us uncover and share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from. Our community stretches from Texas to Tasmania, from veterans to history lovers, and you are part of it. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.